kindness and humility. Now, one of you might say, oh, I like that third one. But then again, there are many other virtues. Each of you might think of one. You know, we're not going to call upon you to answer, but you might think of one that would be yours. Here are some: honesty, justice, honor, love, generosity, fortitude, forgiveness, compassion, integrity. Now, you probably have another couple, and maybe one. I'm just looking for one virtue. So, in a minute's time or so, I'll get back to this unfinished sermon and see what virtue we put in there. But in the meantime, I'll give you some clues. The week before we became a parish, I received a check from a cousin of my mother's, her first cousin. Her name was Helen Barrett over in Moraga. And Helen sent us a check for $4,000. Now, Helen could afford it, but the point was that she took out her checkbook and wrote the check. With that money, I went up to the school district and talked to them about our renting some space in the school district, and we came up with the idea of John Baldwin School on Green Brook, and we settled upon that for a very minimal amount of money. But the principal, John Hagopian, and his staff welcomed us with great enthusiasm, and they accommodated us at their inconvenience because we were moving all of their library textbooks around every Sunday or every Saturday, and our kids were reading their textbooks during Mass. And, you know, the librarian had to put all this back together again on Monday morning. Then we had 10 acres of land. The diocese had purchased it, and within 2 weeks of our becoming a parish, we received a statement from the diocese for $140,000 for this 10 acres of land. Now that was stunning to me, but in retrospect, it turns out to be very generous on the part of our diocese, because these 10 acres had fences on 2 sides and a brand new sidewalk on 2 sides. It was an old walnut orchard, and with the abandoned house just sitting about where our current church is now. See? So anyway, there was something interesting about this statement. There was no timeline for us to pay it back. That's the amount the diocese had spent in acquiring this land. But there was no expectation that we just needed to know that that was on the table. But there was no indication that the diocese was expecting us, you know, to start coughing up. And there'd be no interest on this loan. So it turned out to be just fine. Now, we needed help, and we got it. We had those young Jesuits from Berkeley come out to help us. The Jesuits at that time, they belonged to the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. The Jesuits had a 5-year theology program. The rest of us had 4, and we were ordained after 4 years. But they had 5. But they ordained their men after 4 years and then kept them in school for another year, writing papers. And that's why we had access to these young, bright Jesuits who would come out each year, one or another, sometimes two, to help us out on the weekends. And they also charged us close to nothing. Now, we needed a religious ed program. Pat Grady is yawning. But we had Pat Campbell and Phyllis Rivera and a whole group of women who opened up their homes for our religious ed program that very September or October. And Dan Cardelli and St. Isidore's supplied us with all of the textbooks. Then we started a youth program, youth ministry program. Now I'm not sure if we needed it, but we started it. But Maureen Barron and a couple of the others that you mentioned, Bob, put together this program. And they did it all at St. Isidore's facility with their gym and their rooms. And there was never any expense. I mean, there was never any rent. You know, they just did it. And in retrospect, I think we were talking about all the things that we needed and other people needed to provide. It was all about our needs. And now getting back to that incomplete, unfinished, wasn't a symphony, it was an unfinished sermon, where I said, we're going to do all the things that other parishes do, but we're going to do them with something that distinguishes us individually and collectively. There'd be some virtue that we would identify. Each person can pick out your own virtue, but I'll tell you about mine. I think, for me, at this stage of my life, looking back, I would pick out the virtue of gratitude. Because it's my contention that if I am grateful and my heart is full of gratitude, all these other ventures, all these other virtues fill in. The whole list, and many more that you mentioned, they all fill in if I'm grateful. So that is the conclusion of the unfinished sermon.